Okay, welcome to the Easy Meetup in Oslo, February 22nd, 2018. My name is Jani Tarvainen. I work for Easy Systems as a professional services consultant. Today the topic that we're going to talk about is GraphQL APIs with Easy Platform, Symfony CMS. That's the topic of the day. So we'll be covering quite a few different things today. So we'll first give a brief introduction to what GraphQL is, a little bit about what goes underneath that umbrella. Then we'll go into GraphQL with Easy Platform, as well as then also talk a little bit about caveats, like what's not so good maybe about it, don't believe the hype. And then finally, depending on time, we can actually also take a look at one example site that's built with the technology to see a little bit on what it looks like when you actually work with it. So we'll go ahead. So first of all, for the introduction, I think at least some of you know the basics, and maybe I will go through some of the same things today. But just for the audience also maybe playing back later, we'll go through the basic things. So GraphQL, it's a single term, which actually is an umbrella term for quite a few different things. So first of all, links obviously will be then links to the sites, so if you want to more information later. But back to GraphQL, so the GraphQL umbrella, or what I decided to call it, is first of all it's a communications protocol. It's not TCP or HTTP, it's more like a language, that higher level language, which just defines the syntax and this kind of things. How do you speak GraphQL? But obviously that itself is valuable, yes, but it's also a query language in the same sense as you would maybe have SQL as a query language. You can make certain type of queries and then you will get results back. You can write queries and get different results, and all in all it looks very visual in a sense if you're used to something which is REST, which you just send parameters, and it's a bit more approachable and human readable maybe. Then okay, these are the two things which it kind of is, but then to actually use it, you need two different things. You need a server implementation, so some kind of server which will talk GraphQL. GraphQL itself is not it doesn't define anything what's underneath the layer. It's just kind of the transport protocol. So you could have a GraphQL server for Elastic or Easy Platform, or who knows, an e-commerce platform or anything. So it doesn't really define what's going on underneath there. So it's just a layer there. In addition, because the definition or the structure is not, let's say, it's not very simple, or that it has a lot of features. So there's also client implementations. So usually JavaScript clients, and you could of course have Java or PHP or any other clients, but a majority of them are actually JavaScript clients used by mobile development or then front-end applications. We'll take a look at a few of those as well. But anyway, these are the kind of four things that I would see what GraphQL is. So it's not one specific thing. Then maybe a high level timeline. This is one technology also which originates from Facebook, and they have been using it since 2012. First they used it for mobile applications only. So if you've used the Facebook application in 2013, for example, it has used not exactly the same protocol, but a very similar protocol to discuss to communicate to the server. And the idea, especially maybe even 5 years ago, was that actually round trips back and forth to the server, where you had a lot of overhead there. So this is one aspect here, and then also the versioning makes it possible that you have 50 different clients, but only one API endpoint, because the requester actually defines the returned value. So these are the kind of high-level background information on what it is, and it was publicly announced, I think, in late 2015. So it's been now available for over 2 years, around maybe 2.5 years, and since that time it has actually now started gaining momentum quite a lot. So it's an open specification, so you can have, or you have reference implementations of it, or the server, for example, but then you have the specification, and it's available. And in 2017 especially, you could see kind of the hype curve going up. Not exactly, because it's a communications protocol, so it's not going to do any fantastic effects or anything like that, but you can see that people have been, there's even a GraphQL conference, which I don't know, maybe it's worthwhile having a conference around a communication protocol, but anyway, that's kind of a thing still. So it I think has reached critical mass in the sense that it will be around for some time at least. So there's adopters, at least GitHub, Pinterest, Shopify, New York Times, Twitter, Yelp. So it's not obviously everything there, but it has, a lot of uses already today. Yep.
I have a question. Is the GraphQL seemingly becoming the de facto standard communicating graph?
Well, there's also databases. There's also a database called dgraph, which actually uses GraphQL as its query language. Yeah. So I don't know if you can say de facto, but for many things, because it's one tool, you have many tools. One tool is not, but it's gaining this kind of not status, but you could say. So it's a very versatile thing. So anyway, in general, it's an alternative to RESTful APIs. So it's an independent of protocol. So it's not using HTTP verbs like post and get. It's not tied to anything like that. You could even send a GraphQL by pigeon or by letter or by just email, whatever, because then it just contains everything that it wants back. So that's a key difference between REST, at least, and then as opposed to REST, which is an architectural pattern, which kind of suggests that you should do something like this, and then everybody has their own understanding of what it is, and then you have that. It's gonna make it. So in any case, it's more of a specification that you can adhere to, and maybe then say that I am compliant, whereas maybe if you say that I'm REST compliant, well, depends on who you ask. So anyway, the one key thing is that it's strongly typed. So all of the elements that you have there, you need to define types, a schema. So if you have in Easy, you have let's say different field types. You have numbers and images and so on, relations. You need to define these or generate these, or they are communicated using the API natively. They are required. So it's kind of self-documenting. You get the documentation from there, but you will obviously need to describe that this is an API that will get the children of this location and so on. But the kind of validity checks will be handled even on the client and on the server. If you create an invalid response, it will just say that, well, I couldn't. So that's one thing which is brings a certain level of safety. And some would say that it's kind of like soap, but I don't know. It's maybe not soap, but it has similar concepts. So anyway, with the GraphQL and PHP in general, the reference implementation of GraphQL, which is written, or it's in I think it's in the Facebook repository. It's a JavaScript implementation, which just says that this is what you could do, or this is how it should work. There's two different PHP implementations of it. the kind of libraries, well, there's more, but these two are the most prominent ones. So there's one called, or one from the company WebOnyx, and the other one is from Yushido, and both of them are pretty much the same. So they try to replicate the reference implementation and the specification so that you would adhere to the standard. And I think I've used both a little bit, but both are, I think, quite feature complete and feel really mature because it's been 3 years, or not 3 years yet, but 2.5 years, so that now at least those are stable. And since Symfony integrations for easy platform will be useful, there's for both of these, there's also a Symfony framework integration. There's the Overblog one, which is for the WebOnyx one. So the WebOnyx team doesn't make a Symfony integration, but the Yushido team, they create both the library as well as the GraphQL bundle, or the integration bundle. And you can find then more information about some things from that leak. But anyway, these are the kind of two prevalent PHP side libraries which we'll focus on today. Then for client libraries, so you can of course just write raw HTTP, because most of the communications is HTTP. So you can write, posts and send curl things, but the client libraries provide convenience. So you can kind of not have to worry about setting URLs and this kind of things, but just set that I want this and this is the query that I want to run. Then you also get things like client-side caching, so that I've fetched some item already, and then maybe the query said that you can cache this for 5 minutes, it won't even go back to the server to say that, have you got something new? So there's something like this. Then there's the security. The GraphQL injection is not exactly as powerful as SQL injection, but still the library sanitize input, so you cannot query or send a parameter that then will break, and then you will start writing your own GraphQL in a sense. And of course it's higher level than SQL, so but it's a similar thing. Then a few notable libraries which are used for browsers, and then Node.js is Relay Modern. Relay has gone through a number of different versions. It's a Facebook library, but now the latest one is called Modern, which is again like third time which they've completely rewritten it, because it's JavaScript, you have to do that. But in any case, so that's now currently one from that team. Then Apollo is something which is also very popular, but it does a lot of things. It's a large project, so they have lots of different things. And the last one is a much newer project. The two first are very established, but the URQL, it's more opinionated, and it's specifically meant to be used with React library. So it kind of makes a lot of decisions for you, but the way I just like to pronounce it is Urguel, so the beer, so it's easier for me to remember because the URQL. But anyway, that's the humor part of the thing. So then to the meat of yeah.
It's still not quite clear to me why you would want to use GraphQL. It's to reduce the number of HTTP queries, is that or requests? Is that
that's one thing. So you can make a query which will return that every one of us would want a little bit different thing. So we will only get what we want back, but it's not something that you couldn't do with REST, for example. But if you see the syntax and the application, it's much nicer to work with. Write queries like, I want this field, this field, this field in an indented format, and then instead of, I don't know, REST, and then this first, and then this first, and then this first, and that, yeah.
A different answer to that question is that GraphQL would be like platform or implementation independent. So for instance, if you're creating a graph engine, that's probably has its own API or its own query language, right? Like Elastic has a graph engine, and you need to use the Elasticsearch API to talk over REST using JSON, right? And you actually would need to format your queries in the format that Elasticsearch would require. Whereas with GraphQL, you could, for instance, use Elasticsearch engine, write your code, and then if you would like to port your graph engine to a different provider, you could use that and still use the GraphQL. That's why I asked if GraphQL is becoming like the de facto standard. It would simplify like implementation.
Yeah. And there's a lot of
from implementation of the client or code, your web page code or whatever, from the graph implementation.
Yeah, and there's also quite a few of those which just kind of you have a REST API, but then you create kind of a facade which can then in the behind it will use old APIs or other APIs just to make, because developers are lazy. If they have an easier option, they will use the easy option. But anyway, so good.
What exactly do you mean by graph engine?
The graph, the engine that runs or do your graph calculations, for instance.
Interpretation.
Yeah. Like finding dependencies, or finding commonalities, and things like that. That you would use graph for.
Good. So anyway, good.
And there are
good.
tons of these graph implementations today.
Yeah, it's really Neo4j is the
Neo4j is
the number one, I think, at least in terms of mindshare. But let's continue with something. It's something we can actually feel tangible, and hopefully so, because of graph theory and this, I don't understand that. So I'll just use the tools and then create results, hopefully. So anyway, the GraphQL with easy platform part. So GraphQL in general for content management systems. Content management systems actually do have a lot of all kind of complexity, because you can easily make a CMS, which many people have created, but there's or CMS or content feed or some kind of, there's a lot of tools for creating GraphQL APIs, for example, tools like which create it directly from Postgres schema. It automatically creates it, and then you don't have to do any coding, because you just define the schema and users and you get a GraphQL API from that. But for CMS, there's lots of things like permissions and so on. So there's a definite need for well, not a need, but you will find it content management a complex area, and then GraphCM or the GraphQL is a good language for that. I like the fact that it's a generic protocol, so it's not CMS specific, but obviously as was discussed, it's not even system specific or domain specific. You can use it for a lot of different things. But of course the queries themselves are application specific. So if I would create an easy platform GraphQL functionality, then I will need to write GraphQL that will make sense in that domain. But the syntax will be the same, the tooling will be the same, but the language, the same as SQL. You have SQL, but then your SQL database structure is whatever it is. And it's one thing which I do like exactly is it's friendly for developer friendly, especially for queries, because the visualization is much nicer than in many kind of let's say REST kind of things where you work with some abstract. Of course, you have these kind of client libraries also for REST APIs, which make it more similar. But one thing which is also common now, which you would have gotten hanged to write something like this. So here is my query. Maybe I will actually extend it. This is just an example. So here is my query. So here I get my data, and here I have my template. Like this, you shouldn't do according to the best practice from 5 years ago. But now this is the hottest thing. This is what you should do. You should have the query there, and it makes it really nice to work, because if I need to add something, you just fetch there. Of course, the backend needs to be solid and so on, but creating front end and these applications is really kind of low overhead. Then for GraphQL and Easy Platform, Easy Platform does not ship with GraphQL support. First thing, but don't let that stop you because obviously it's software, so you have options. So there's 3 options. So you could use a ready-made bundle called Easy Platform GraphQL bundle. Alternatively, you could integrate using a Symfony GraphQL bundle or even just a bare library. So there was the WebUnix one and the Yoshido one. You could integrate these, or then you could do the wise thing and roll your own GraphQL server, which you shouldn't do. It's like rolling your own CMS, except it's probably even a worse idea. So the options, so for Easy Platform GraphQL bundle, it's an experimental bundle from October 2016, so it's not new. It's not maintained, but because it's actually integrates the overblog GraphQL bundle into the Easy Platform repository, it's mostly glue code that just bridges the two things, so it might not really be an issue because maybe there won't be that much changes and maybe you wouldn't change it all the time anyway. But it's just that good to keep in mind. I forked it to work with Easy Platform version 2. You can use it. Obviously in 2016 we didn't have any clue what version 2 would be like, but because of the stability it works fine. And it actually has a pretty decent feature list already, so you can do things in the common easy domain, so you can query content, location, users and objects. You can also search content, list location children, and this kind of thing. So very generic things which if you worked with Easy Platform you will find them very familiar. So now I will jump quickly to the graphical shell. So this is a shell application which just communicates to a GraphQL server. You will see this in many places, but obviously the functionality will be always different. The documentation, this is out of the box when you install the experimental bundle. You can see here that we have some documentation. Here's what we have. We have queries, which are reads, and then you can also perform mutations, which are writes. I haven't done a lot of mutations myself, but it's technically then you can modify also, so it's not read-only. I'm mostly focused on read-only. But then if I go to query, then I can see, for example, with the types defines here that if I have let's say I have a location, Easy Platform or Easy Publish, a location, you can find a location by an integer, the ID. Then a location has certain fields. It has an ID, then it has content ID, and because the type system also allows you to define types, so a location object can actually contain content objects. So inside embedded I have a content object, which is again another type, but I've defined in my schema that this contains an object, so I don't need to repeat a lot of things because this is the definition which is defined just once, and then I've just referenced that this should be a content object. And the shell, then not that. I think this actually always changes, but the syntax looks kind of like JSON, so I can do location, children, and because I get this type information from the API or the information, then I can also say that I can search for ID2, and then let's see, having a hard time typing, but then I can get ID, I can get children, which is children of children, and so on. So this is just the way that I can dig into details and so on. Let me actually see location. So instead of location children, I will actually get the the root object. So here, let me prettify this. So I will get this. Then this site doesn't actually have any children, but this location will have a content object embedded in it, and inside it's the ID 1, and then I can get the name property, which is the easy generated name property, and also I can get the content. Fields. So I can get fields, and then these are field IDs, and here I can get also the values if I want. So the idea here is just that you kind of request something and then you get that same thing back. It can of course quickly start looking a bit difficult if you just write a really fast one, but for me the tooling, if I copy paste something like this, well, not break it, but I use this to develop my queries because it will enable me. It's like an ID for the queries, and this is for your GraphQL API. You can use this exact same console, or GraphQL is the name. So yeah, here's one example query. So this is just location, children, and then I can pass parameters here, then objects and so on. So it looks like JSON, but it's not exactly. You don't need commas separating items, and there's some differences, but in any case. But because you can see this, and you can even run multiple queries in one GraphQL query. So I could get location children from here, and then maybe some users from there, and they all come in one response. So another option, then this was all using this was also some example of GraphQL, but this was what if you install that bundle, this is what you get. It will automatically update your schema based on your content structure, so you don't need to define anything, you just add your things. But obviously the other approach would be then to integrate the GraphQL bundle so that you will be able to get results. Both of these integration bundles are pretty good, as I said. Both of them have kind of the same steps. You need to configure a schema with types. Both have a little bit different configuration system, but it's mostly YAML or PHP. And then you need to create a resolver. A resolver is what will resolve your specific, for example, what is an easy object. That easy object in this case will be a resolver that uses the easy PHP API to get an object and then return that and maybe format it or something. But a resolver is just something that fetches things from the database usually. And obviously you need to do some hands-on work to get used to the lingo and so on, but I think it's I've used both of them and they're pretty good. There's also some example of using like Symfony Flex application just to go through the steps to see with practical example, because obviously just using the easy bundle gives you like a lot of things and then you don't understand how it works. Well, that was the case with me. I just use it and this is magic. And like, okay. Yeah, but my recommendations, I would recommend for tinkering, use the Easy Platform GraphQL bundle because it works great, but there might be issues such as maybe if you enter a certain query or something and then you can actually leak something because it's not being verified and tested in that sense. So there might be some things like that, but you can also extend it with your queries. So you can have a GraphQL endpoint which actually responds from Easy or from some other system, and you can behind the scenes have different systems masked behind one GraphQL endpoint. Of course, you could then have multiple endpoints as well. But the point here why we should use for production, I would recommend to use the bundle or integrate a bundle, because then you know exactly what's going on and you won't accidentally leak everything, because what you're giving now is technically like an open book it even tells you what data is here. You will go to the GraphQL and then it says, we have users here. And then you go, let me see if I can read the admin user. Okay, I can read the admin user. Can I also mutate the password? Oh, I can. So it's kind of, you don't have even the kind of lucky chance that nobody will ever find that. But if you expose it, so on. So I think probably it would be good to have a framework to expose query types in Easy. So in Easy you can create pre-built queries to get news items, for example, in Easy platform, sort of pre-built ones, and then maybe some kind of wizard, not even a wizard, but somebody could create something that just exposes those automatically through here. So I just write my my query type and then I get it through there. So then obviously never believe the hype. So there's some annoying things there as well. So you're exactly exposing a generic interface for users to query, so they can query anything, and they might find things that they shouldn't. And also there's a case that you can make queries which are very complex and might cause very much stress on the server. But it's a part of the specification that you can define complexities, so that, I don't know, let's say one depth brings you X amount of complexity points, and then if a query's complexity level is 220, then you will say, well, I won't execute this query because that's something, well, I won't do that. So it has a lot of, this is why you wouldn't want to create your own server. But it's another thing is that HTTP caching is not trivial, because everything is a post. In most client libraries you can use get as well, but even if you use get, because the order of parameters and the field that you get might be very different, this is something which it's more difficult than with some like simpler things. Yeah, then technically you could have GraphQL injections which just escape the GraphQL and then starts querying something else. You won't ever get like to the database level, but you might still be able to do some backend, just try to find something and then find it. And obviously then it's just one tool. It was a good question that why should I use it? You can use it for certain things. I would use it for decoupled site building at least, because it's very convenient. But there's no perfect tool, but this kind of things I enjoy using it, and I think I've used most of my time, but we'll just take a quick look at an example. So this is actually using Easy platform as a backend. So it's just a very simple site, because that's the point. The point wasn't to create a complex site, but you can see here inspect, and then network, and then let me go there. You can see it makes a GraphQL query, which looks like something like this. And what I sent was query, and on the front page, for example, it's one nice thing about that you can make multiple queries. So in the behind we have a content structure where I have the front page, and then I have sub pages here. I can get these all in one single query. So if you look at the developer experience, you can find the slides for this, but you can also find the source code. So let's just save time and look at the quick example. So for this front page, I want to make a query which fetches the content from the front page and the links to the pages underneath.
There was a question here, I think.
Ah, okay.
So in practice, it's just a post request with some JSON. Is that it?
Yes.
So the client library transforms your query to JSON.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know if it's because it's not exactly valid JSON, but it's a GraphQL blob that gets posted to the server, and the server looks at, okay, what's going on.
Is that why they use post? Is to get
I think maybe it's like a safety, that it's just safer to use and then you won't get caching issues. I think that's kind of that everybody uses post by default, so you know it won't get cached. Same as HTTP2 decided to go with SSL only, because otherwise you would be in a world where you can't use HTTP2 because firewalls will block HTTP2. So I don't know, maybe that's the reason. And you're not forced to use it. You can use GET, but post is the de facto when you out of the box thing usually. So here, this page, technically 5 objects, and how it looks here, where I have components, sorry, not components, but pages, and then I have my front page. So my front page is, the GraphQL looks like this. So here I can also alias things, so I can call this front page, so it's nicer to work with when outputting the data. So here I get front page, then this is just a variable that I get from the URL. Then I can get the content object, I get a few fields from there, and then this is a bit more complex than usually because I wanted the HTML5 format, from not the XML format. But you can select the field values, so on, and you can also get already in the default bundle, you can get different image versions as well and all kind of things. And then in the same query, so here the query starts, I also get something which I alias as activities, which are the lists, and this is another internal query which gets resolved at the same request, which is location children, and then just the same password here, but this time I only get the name and the ID because that's all I need for the URL. I could get everything, but I wouldn't need that. So then this gets down to the template. In this case, template is kind of just next to it. So here I simplify the fields a little bit because it's still a bit verbose for outputting in templates. But here I get the fields, and then I pass the other items onto another template, like include, but it's something which it's, if I would need to add something, or I would need to add date, then I add the date here, then the query goes here, and I just scroll a little bit down and then output it, the date here. I don't need to go back and forth. So that's something there. It's there's a video version of the same, or more details about that, partly the same things that I've told about that, but this is pretty much it. So any more questions? Are you more puzzled than when we started? I think you probably need to work with it hands-on to get a more feel for it. But it's something which is, I value it especially because it's so universally applicable. It's something that I can use it with easy, but I can use it with other tools as well. So good. Thank you for your time. I hope you learned something, and enjoy the beer. There's